control you, not the men who set it up, because they're mortal, they're temporary. Okay, there will be, and their family members were carried on, yes, but you have to understand this: the New World Order is the secular system, and the fact that the church is secular, like you say, and listed that way, that's the order. That is the New World Order. By changing religion into legalist or secular corporations, you've defeated the whole purpose of religion, which is to avoid persons or corporations. You've completely defeated the purpose of religion by turning the church secular. I mean, it's a beautifully connived plan to destroy any reason for religious, or any possibility of religious freedom, because you're not worshiping God anymore. You're worshiping a false god, a corporation, a pope, whatever denomination you're in. It's still part of, especially if you say Sunday is the Sabbath day. That's a Catholic doctrine. That's not anything biblical.
Oh, absolutely. And Clint, and just a heads up, just because this was great information here. I went live. Went live about a minute and 20 minutes ago. But a fantastic point, though. Like, and recently in the Catholic nation of Poland, they actually passed a law on Sunday outlawing, I believe, shopping and like all commercial activity, because they want all Polish people to honor the secular Roman Catholic Church on Sunday. And to your point, I'm going to link the New York Times article. People aren't aware when the Vatican when the Vatican recreated diplomatic relations with the United States in 1984, when Ronald Reagan was president. And Ronald Reagan, who his father and his brother were Knights of Columbus, and I have 5 archived videos on my channel from the Reagan Presidential Library, where he's on my YouTube, where he's speaking to the Knights of Columbus and the Knights of Malta. And the reason that you see him getting so many standing ovations is because he did this key move with recreating diplomatic relations from the U.S. to the Vatican. But it was said that in the New York Times, I'm going to pull up that article right here. But it was said that that the United States actually didn't violate any notion of separation of church and state by this move, because the Vatican / Holy See is a secular nation state, not a church.
Well,
and I'm just going to this is the exact quote here from the New York Times. I'm just going to link the story. It was Larry Speaks who made this announcement. He said, the quote from the New York Times, the United States holds John Paul II in high esteem. We respect the moral and political influence which he and the Vatican exercise throughout the world. We admire the courage he stands to take in defense of Western values. But the NY Times says both Larry Speaks and the White House spokesman John Hughes, who is a State Department spokesman, said there was no violation of the separation of church and state because the United States was recognizing the Holy See rather than the Roman Catholic Church herself.
Right.
And that's some incredible legalistic doublespeak, because the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church are one and the same. But the reason but when they use the title Vatican, that's referring to a secular nation state. And that's why, if people aren't aware, the Vatican has 180 political ambassadors stationed all over the world, known as nuncios. The one in Canada lives in the biggest mansion in Ottawa, the Rockcliffe Mansion. But,
commercial treaties and everything's commercial, right? Which is, again, nothing to do with the Bible. Plus, the reason it says it's, keep in mind, the state and the church, those are secular terms in and of themselves, because the church and the state, in their real sense, mean people. All right, the foundation of what we would call Christianity, or those who follow Christ, again, the law or word of God personified, the flesh made, the word made flesh, as it says in the Bible. The idea is that you're a people, you're a like-minded people, you know the law, the Bible, and you follow it. That's what makes you a Christian, quote unquote. But again, Christian is not a word used in the Bible. Christ doesn't say be a Christian, doesn't say worship me. He says follow me. I'm the example. I am the law personified in order to worship Jehovah, the God of what they call the sovereign of the universe, but of means belonging to. Anyway, whole long thing that I'm doing on my show. But the point is, church and state are secular terms that take, because if you look at state, it means people. If you look at church, it means people. But there's a secondary definition, which is, of course, the everything else that man creates that becomes part of the quote unquote church or state. So you can't confuse those two things. One is real, one is artificial, right? Once you do anything, and of course the Bible is certainly in agreement there. Nothing made of the hands of men is of God. There's no temple, there's no building, there's no corporation, there's nothing but people either following or not following Jesus Christ, which again is the law of God, the Word of God personified. That's it. There's no other definition for church. Anything you attach to that has a secular meaning, and that's why. I mean, if you go back, you see that it was the Pope who created the civil side of the law. There was only religious law, and the church was always the state. And then they separated the church and state because that way the church can justify the state can justify the church, and you have that sort of left-right support group. You have the Democrats, the Republicans, even though they're the same bloodlines. You have they're supporting each other, and that's a word that we need to look up for yourself. It's antagonist, or what is antagonism? An example of something that's antagonist doesn't mean you're actually opposed. It means you're actually for, or you're helping. It's a system that, while it seems in opposition, let's take a clock. What is a clock? Clock is a bunch of opposing things that makes everything turn. Everything in that machine is antagonistic to the other because it forces it to do something against its proper function, right? So, or its will, if you will, its stationary or neutral capacity. So when you're talking about anything that is adversarial or opposed or against, I say, if you go into Webster's dictionary right now and you look up the word for, F-O-R, because we're always for or against something, the word for, the first definition you're going to see is against. Well, how can that be? You mean they mean the same thing? Well, yeah. Because I'm for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton and therefore opposed to the other means that I really am voting for one antagonist or the other because they work together. They're not opposed to each other. They are different cogs in the same machine or the same bloodline family with the same goal and the same purpose, which is to rule the common class. So no matter which one I'm for, okay, I'm for, which means I'm against something else. And that really what I'm against is my own self-government, my own freedom, my own personal liberty, political liberty, and natural liberty. I'm for Trump, therefore I'm pretty much against myself. See, the words, all these words have this similar sort of trickery to them because they're legal terms.
Well, and Clint, just to jump in here quick, is this another reason too why majority of the words in the English language have stemmed from Latin roots? And just while you're talking there, I'm actually going to screen share here because if people haven't seen photos from the Alfred E. Smith dinner that takes place every year, this event is I would say the go-to event that shows that how controlled American politics is by the secular Vatican political machine. And this is what happens every year. So this is so here's at the Al Smith dinner in 2016, and what happens is the two political candidates from the Democrats and the Republicans, basically this is like I think they do this under the guise of a charity dinner, but all the elite aristocrat papal knights come here and they tell jokes and they drink and have wine, for instance. Like actually at this Al Smith dinner, Alfred Smith IV was making jokes like calling Henry Kissinger and Howard Rubenstein good Catholics, and like the whole crowd started erupting.
right.
But this is the point of what they do. So you can look up this event started, I believe, right after Al Smith died. Al Smith was a Catholic governor. of New York, who ran for president in 1928 and lost to Herbert Hoover. But after the election, they've kind of immortalized Al Smith, and he was a papal knight, papal chamberlain, Knight of Columbus, Knight of Malta. But both candidates come to this dinner, and there's this famous photo shoot where you can see the Republican and the Democrat with the Archbishop in the center, and you
Well,
can
I
see
mean, this is the
going
this is
back
the
all the way to the 50s.
this is a visual representation of controlled opposition. Right? I have my two opposite forces that both work for me, right? And they're sitting beside me, celebrating together. And then I remember this. They got up and even needled each other, because it's a sign. I mean, how do you put this into terms that are simple? It's a sign of such confidence in your power that you can actually have both these opposing forces that aren't opposing at all. It's a dog and pony show, right? You're so powerful that you're not even afraid to show that you control both sides. I mean, that's huge.
Well, I think you can go deeper. Like pull up some of the photos here. Like I wanted to go into some of the history of the declaration of the national emergency and how it dates back to the Roman Republic, and how basically like, the ancient Roman SWAT teams who would be sent out on the national emergencies were called the lictors, and they carried the fasces. The fasces were basically like the assault weapon back in the day. They would use the fasces to go out and suppress the quote unquote emergency. But think about all the fasces scattered all over the U.S. symbolism.
It's everywhere.
I think that's the ultimate expression of power. Like they have the two fasces in the House of Representatives. I'll pull those up later on the stream. They got the fasces on the United States Military Police, National Sheriff's Association, the United States Senate, the U.S. Administrative Courts, the U.S. Tax Court. The fasces are scattered all throughout.
It's on the penny.
Actually, on the there was a United States dime that was commissioned in
dime.
1910. Dime. Well, dime. Yeah, no, what dime? I was getting the currency the notes there confused. And going back, I found Grover Cleveland on a 1888 presidential banner. It says "Vote for Grover Cleveland tax reform." It's an eagle carrying two fasces on the talons, and this isn't just in America. This is in Russia, their federal bailiff service.
The idea though behind the fasci, I mean, it's like what you were talking about, but it's a bundle of sticks, fastened together, tied together, and the idea is that a single stick you can break, but a fasci or a bundle of sticks, you ever tried to break a bunch of sticks? You can't do it and that signifies this sort of unity of power, or in the United States or the United Nations, the reason they use the symbol is because they've what is the United Nations but the same thing as the United States, only on a national level. The nation is a union of states, and the United Nations is a union of nations. And the problem is just like when the United States became its own sort of entity, where before it was a compact between the states, and then it started becoming its own corporation, its own power structure, and then it defeated the states and became what it is today. The United Nations is now has its peacekeeping forces, and it goes into countries and it does the same thing. Whereas before it was a league of nations, and that got put down. Then it became United Nations, and again, a compact between nations, whereas the United States is a compact between states. Well, now that compact is again morphing into this corporate structure that's going to do the same thing. It's going to defeat all the nations. So you have, of course, their symbol is going to be the fasci, because a single stick can be easily broken, but when you control all the nations, one gets out of line, the rest of the nations come to the rescue, just like the northern states came to the rescue when the southern states said, "Screw this! This is out of control. You've become a monster," right? So it's the same thing. It's history repeating itself, just by a different name.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. It's history. What was the quote from Churchill? Churchill, I think he said, "Those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it."
Well,
And
that's
this is why we say, like, throughout the going back, like a lot of people think that just this is just an interesting take here. A lot of people think that, like, let's say the 20th century was like a great century for prosperity and freedom, but I would say it was just as despotic as the 13th century, the 20th century. Like a lot of the strongman dictators of the 20th century were devout Roman Catholic dictators, just like how it was serving the Pope, just like how it was, in the ancient times, like Louis the 14th, Emperor Focus, going
I,
way
I,
back to the emperor. But Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, Pavlovich, Franco, Jorge Videla down in Argentina. Like, a lot of people don't know that this current Pope was overseeing the dirty wars, bloodbath going on in Argentina. And actually, like, on Bergoglio, Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis, he's a Jesuit. On his orders, he actually sent many Catholics to the extermination camps. So there's nothing religious at all about this political institution, and that's the key point, I think, to realize here, that it's a political institution.
if I were to sum up what that century, last century was, it was the perfection, or if you will, the re-implementation of the ancient feudal system. In other words, they perfected the sort of transitionary document, the birth certificate, took it worldwide, took Social Security worldwide to where it's now in 140 countries. We have the same Social Security system as China and every other country, right? We think we're somehow special because we have that. No, it's the way they control us. It's in fact, it's actually very important to understand that, because the Social Security system is a future it's an obligation, but it's also a future return, a future, can't think of the term, a benefit, excuse me. And as long as you have some future benefit coming, then you're still bound by all the laws and everything that until you get that benefit. And what do they call it? An old age or death benefit. So you get it till you die, right? So we're sucked into this system, this feudal system, because we get these benefits. So what they did last century was to, it started in the late about 1850 or so, I think, and all of a sudden everybody in the world in the 19th century is suddenly filling out birth certificates without any, this was nothing before. You just filled out your family Bible, and it was a true sense of, hey, this is when my son was born. It's proof of inheritance by blood. Well, now you've entered everybody into what, for lack of a better term, is a feudal system, a system of piracy, and everybody's under this birth certificate contract, which again is not a written contract; it's a performance debt, because you have this obligation, you have these benefits and everything. And if you're going to get your benefits, well, you got to stay a citizen. You got to give your fealty and your everything to that which is going to give you the benefit. So it's they own all the land. They've pirated out from under us, because persons, property cannot own land. You don't own anything.
And actually, Clint, just I believe this, if I'm correct, because I've seen this in a few, probably 6 months ago now or so. I was going through some some like Harvard Law journals on just through Library Genesis, which is a great resource if people aren't aware. Libgen.is to get free journals and books. But I found out that a lot of the basically, like, the idea of a person and the contractual citizenship, these sources claimed it went back to the Emperor Justinian of the Roman Empire. And this is a system that goes back. Justinian was emperor in like 540 and around then, and they cited that, like, Napoleon's Code Napoleon was strictly modeled off of the Code Justinian, and they even cited, like, American law and British law has been modeled and altered off of this Roman system.
Keep going back, and you'll eventually get to Hammurabi.
Oh, the Babylonian codes. Yeah, I believe
Right.
that is the most ancient like system of legalism, and that was all based off, like, contractual, like, serfdom. Like, you're volunteering to become like a serf in the legal system, which is how, like, the current structure is set up, and that's why, like, persons are defined as like artificial corporations, like fictions, and that's why corporations, are fictions. And I'll just say with the United Nations, I think it's not a coincidence at all. People should realize that the UN Charter was signed in probably the most like Jesuitical town or city in the world, that being San Francisco. According to the author Charles Chinnicky, who wrote a great book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, Chinnicky said that the Jesuits had been controlling San Francisco since 1850. And all you got to do is look at the amount of like mayors, police chiefs that come out of San Francisco that went to the Jesuit University of San Francisco. Even Jerry Brown, I think, is a lay Jesuit, educated at a Jesuit seminary in Santa Clara. Two-time governor of California. He comes from San Francisco, and that's where the Bohemian Club is too, if people aren't aware, in the city of San Francisco. And the gatekeepers of the Bohemian Club are called the Knights of Saint Hubertus, which is like a Roman Catholic secret society, a hunting society, who are the keepers of Bohemian Grove. The point being, though, I just wanted to, it was in the city of San Francisco where the UN Charter was drafted, I think in 1945. I think that's very significant. And on the UN on the official seal, the another covert symbol that the Roman control system uses, Clint, is the laurel wreath. And in addition to the fasces, but the Roman, and if you just people type it on their Google search, Roman wreath, you'll see it come up. It's on the United Nations. It's on tons of world. It's almost on every single world organization, the International Monetary Fund. And actually, I have a video on my channel. I think 3 or 4 videos down my feed. It's a Rome Rules report. The current IMF head, Christine Lagarde, she's a devout Catholic. She went to see the Pope in 2016 while she was head of the IMF. Now she's the chair of the European Central Bank, which also uses a laurel wreath. The laurel wreath is on an overwhelming amount of government seals all over the world. Literally on over 60 of them. In terms of U.S. agencies, the CIA uses it, the FBI uses it, Homeland Security uses it. Like it's pretty much universal.
Dude, when I looked at that years ago, and I started looking at all the symbols and everything. And it's easy to get lost in that because you're looking. I mean, everywhere you look, you start seeing the symbol. People take pictures of it, post it online. You can search them, and you go crazy for a while. And it's getting down to why the symbol is there. Is the thing. Now, I never understood. Like I started understanding the notion of Hammurabi, and then Justinian, and by no means do I believe these people actually existed, by the way. There's plenty of evidence that shows there is no Justinian, there's no Hammurabi, there's none of these. These are stories, of course, and this goes back to the Genesis story. Genesis is not a word that was used. That was actually added later on. The actual Genesis is called the Book of Moses in its original, thing, its original translation. So you look at Hammurabi's code of laws, and you start going forward, and you see how similar they are. The Code of Hammurabi basically mimics the Elena and Nish, which is the Babylonian creation mythos, and he is, when Marduk sent me to rule over men, to give the protection of the right to the land, I did right in righteousness. And he goes through this entire bloodline of gods, basically, who give him the right to rule, and therefore he's releasing this code. It's the same with the Pope. It's the same with all these different names that are basically Roman mythology, if you will. The point I'm trying to make is this. In Congress, because we know that Congress, it's Roman law, in other words, written law or strict law. And it's not this, Congress doesn't do anything that is of nature of God. They don't. It's purely secular, is my point. And the gods are secular gods. They are not considered the supreme. The point I'm trying to make, and it's hard to make, is that if you go into the congressional building, there's something that you will not see on television. Now, they can't help, of course, when you look at the picture of Congress, the president sitting there and the vice president and the 2 main Congress members, there's the fasci right there. I mean, you cannot overlook that. They're hanging right there for everyone to see. That is, of course, that Roman symbol we're talking about. I mean, that is their power right there. However, where does that all come from? What's behind it is the question. All right. So if you go to the government website, which is AOC, architect of the Capitol, right, in Congress itself, if you were to actually turn around and look at the back of Congress where the cameras don't operate, on the back wall are all the busts of what they call the lawmakers. I'll just read. This is from the website, okay? The above relief portraits of lawgivers, these are like, Roman statue, concrete or marble heads. The above relief portraits of lawgivers are located in the House chamber of the U.S. Capitol building. You want to know what is the origin or source or what they consider the source of our law? I'll tell you what's not up there: Jesus Christ. The law of God is the word of the Bible is not one of the lawgivers.
Actually, Clint, this is the document in the official. I think this was 1798, the Treaty of Tripoli. It was actually stated that the United States is not a Christian.
Right. Exactly. The Mohammedans and the Christians can be friends or whatever, that it's not a Christian nation, And there's several instances of that. And I mean, it's obvious. Like I said, here's the 23 marble relief portraits over the gallery doors of the House chamber in the U.S. Capitol depict historical figures noted for their work in establishing the principles that underlie American law. This is straight from the government website, okay? The principles that underlie American law, they were installed when the chamber was remodeled in 1949 to 1950. Here is a list of those essentially gods, these mythical figures, some of them real, some of them not, hanging on Congress. George Mason, Robert Joseph Potier, John Baptiste Colbert, Edward I, Alfonso X, Gregory IX, St. Louis, Justinian I, Tribonian, Lycurgus.
Clint, I'm going to cut you off. Are they referring to Pope Gregory?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. Hammurabi, Moses. Now notice Moses is up there because Moses is a lawgiver. Remember, Moses brought the law, but Jesus brought, grace and whatever the Bible says, two completely different, laws. Moses brought the law of the Jews, in other words. Solon, Papinian, Gaius, I don't even know who some of these are, Maimonides, Suleiman, Innocent III, another pope.
Simon, wow, he was innocent. Wow. So just they have a bust of Innocent III in the
absolutely as noted for their work in establishing the principles that underlie American law. That's the maxims, okay? The bad maxims, not the good. The ones that come from the Bible, they're the foundation. Every other maxim, when you get into contract and commerce and you start signing your soul away, that's where all these principles or maxims come from. So, Innocent III, Simon de Montfort, Hugo Grotius, Sir William Blackstone, who's big in the legal dictionary, world, Napoleon I, and Thomas Jefferson.
Just to clear, I'm shocked at Innocent III because he's literally the father of the Inquisition. This guy oversaw the massacre of millions of Waldenses and Albigenses.
Well, okay, how about Hammurabi? Here's Hammurabi's code of laws, okay? When Anu, the sublime king of the Anunnaki, and Bel, the lord of heaven and earth, who decreed the fate of the land, assigned to Marduk, the overruling son of Ea, god of righteousness, dominion over earthly man, and made him great among the Agigi, they called Babylon by his illustrious name, made it great on earth, and founded an everlasting kingdom in it, whose foundations are laid as solely as those of heaven. And Anu and Bel called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince who feared God to bring about the rule of righteousness to the land. That's just the beginning of Hammurabi's code of laws. Right, goes into all the different gods of Babylon. That is a principle maker of our system of law, the Code of Hammurabi. That should right there. That's like, but again, you're not going to see this. You don't see this when they have the film on the front of the Congressional building, and they never show the back. You will not see these busts of the gods that they worship, right? Of the historical figures they say that they worship.
Oh, Clint, just to clarify, just what's the is this so this is a government site where this is coming from, like a Senate or House site?
If you go to, let me go back real quick. Where'd I go? It's Architect of the Capitol website's AOC.gov, and just look for, the relief portraits basically of the lawgivers, and they're in the House chamber of the U.S. Capitol building.
Oh, fantastic. Holy cow. Well, I was going to bring this up. If you want to keep going into this, we can. But there's also a lot of people, there's a ceremonial mace of the House of Representatives, and that's also a Roman fasces. And I have the quote here from historyhouse.gov. And they say, wherever and whenever the U.S. House of Representatives meets, this historic artifact is there. It is the mace. The mace is made up of 3 parts, a bundle shaft of 13 rods, a silver globe, and an eagle with spread rings. The bundled rods of the mace resemble fasces, or fasces. Fasces used in the ancient Roman Republic symbolize strength through unity. And this transitions to my next point, because the whole idea of, and you mentioned this, it's a great point. You mentioned this on the last show we did. If you have a constitution that can just be suspended, and you can just declare a state of national emergency, like your constitution is essentially useless. And the national emergency dates back to the ancient Roman Republic that was just cited by the U.S. government as the source of the fasces that are present on all of their on tons of the U.S. government seals. But the official, back in the day, declaring a national emergency was called Senatus Consultum Ultimum. It's just from right on the Wikipedia. It says here, Senate Consultus Ultimum is the modern term given to a decree of the Roman Senate during the late Roman public time, passed in times of emergency. And this act, would give the Roman Senate, dictator powers. The Senatus could right from Wikipedia, like it's well sourced. The Senatus Consultum Ultimum effectively replaced the disused Roman dictatorship by removing limitations on the magistrate's powers.
Well,
after the rise of the Principate, there was little need for the Senate to issue the decree again, and that's some of the history. So, in the year 500 BC, the dictatorship was back. Between 500 and 200 BC, the Roman dictator would just declare states of national emergency whenever he wanted. But around 200 BC,
so do our presidents.
Absolutely, and that's where people realize this is straight, just modeled off of the ancient Roman Republic.
Okay, the question is why? Why can they do this? Right now, read that first sentence of that paper that you just were talking about. It says, all governments, all constitutions are suspended.
All of them. And actually, there's another Wikipedia link I have up here, right on the state of emergency Wikipedia page. They list here like 40 countries that have in their emergency declaration powers. So yeah. Argentina. I'll just go here for like a minute so people get the point. In Argentina, a very Catholic country, the Constitution, which has been amended several times, has always allowed for the state of emergency to be declared if the Constitution or the authorities if the Constitution or the authorities it creates are endangered by internal unrest or foreign attack. Going to Australia, state of emergency legislation differs in each state of Australia, but the premier of each state has the power to declare a national emergency. In Brazil, extreme emergency can be declared on the following circumstances: a serious disturbance with national impact, a declaration of war, a response to foreign armed aggression, or an inefficiency on the defense state previously decreed. Here in Canada, the federal government of Canada can use the Emergencies Act to invoke a state of emergency.
Okay.
Denmark, the police chief is the body that has the power to create a national emergency there.
Read the one that I just sent you. This is what Hitler invoked.
Oh, you sent an email?
I sent you a text message in this, whatever this is called, StreamYard.
Oh, was it?
I can read it. This is what Hitler invoked to suspend his constitution. Article 48. If the public safety and order in the German Reich are seriously disturbed or endangered, the President of the Reich may suspend in whole or in part the fundamental rights established, including inviolability of person, inviolability of domicile, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of assembly and association, secrecy in communication, and inviolability of property. Basically, that is all your rights have been just taken away. Nothing is secret, nothing is anonymous, and your property. Why is that? And I'll tell you the reason. This is from Senate document number 43, 73D Congress, first session. It's a paper called Contracts Payable in Gold by George Cyrus Thorpe, submitted to the Senate April 17th, 1933, a very important year. The ultimate owners, quote, the ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual, that's you and me, because we're called individuals by law, individual so called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e., meaning law, amounting to mere user, and which is us. We are users. We use another's property, in other words, and user must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. Okay? What did you take from that? You don't own anything because you've entered into a feudal system through the birth certificate process. You've given up your inherent natural rights. You're not under the Constitution. You're not one of the people, which we call the states. You're under the District of Columbia. District is a word that means distress, distraint, and seizure. Okay? That's the meaning of the word district. Distress, distraint, and seizure. When you look up those words, you'll be pretty shocked what they mean. Seizure is a reference to Caesar. And if you're familiar with the Caesarean section, the Caesarean section, it's when you go in and you remove the baby from its mother. That's why they call it the Caesarean section, because district and Caesar essentially mean the same thing. And this is why Caesar wanted everybody under him. This is why the Pope made his declaration in whatever bull that was, papal bull, that all men, all persons must be under the rule of the church, right, under his thumb.
Oh, absolutely. And I said that was all the way back in 1302 with Unum Sanctum.
Unum Sanctum, right. Right. It's fucking nuts. I mean, we've entered into the system. We don't even know it. And it's all because of that birth certificate. We, like I said, we went back.
I pulled up the link here. I believe this is the proper Roman legal terminology for this whole birth certificate process, but it's capitis or capitis dimensio. Capitis dimensio or capitis dimensio is a term used in Roman law referring to the extinguishing either in whole part of a person's former status and legal capacity. Essentially, this is you're taking yourself from like a free sovereign individual, and now you're joining an incorporated status under the empire.
Exactly. And what that means now, I'm doing a whole dissertation on this, on what the soul is, what the spirit is, and what it means to be incorporated. Because we think of corporations as just these legal things. We don't really think about what that word means when it is applied to us as part of or subject to or in this incorporation, right? We're our cities, our counties, our states, our municipal corporations. What does it mean to be incorporated? Well, this goes back to that notion of e pluribus unum, out of many one. Well, it means literally you can take it back to incorporeal. So your body is, or your soul, your spirit, and your body are being separated. You're becoming part of one body who has one voice on your behalf. You've lost any ability to self-govern or be yourself. You must now follow the law of the single body. You've lost yourself. You have no more self. You're not yourself. You're a person, a persona, a fiction of that, a character, if you will, playing a part, an actor in that corporate body, corpus jurisdictum, all that Latin shit. And by the way, to answer your previous question, I think it's very important to answer let me go to. Oh, it's it's something called Law Latin. About the law, you were asking about the. So Latin, dog Latin is what they call the English language. Dog is a reference to basically any animal that's on 4 feet. You know, people use dog as a very derogative term. That's what they call us. We're basically beasts, beasts of burden, four-legged creatures.
Well, actually,
We,
just to really quickly, I'm pretty sure I've seen the word monster is defined as a human being by birth.
but only in the these are legal terms. So not in if you look in any other dictionary, you're not going to find it. But if you look in I can't remember the name of it, but there's certain dictionaries that explain that. I've got it all in my book. It's in my first book. If anybody, you just search it in, you can download it for free, and then do a search for monster, and you'll find it. But it's a reference to the unregenerate man. In other words, the man that doesn't know the law, the Bible law, the who can be used because, like I said, a Bible reading people cannot be enslaved. Well, problem is, well, remember the church spoke in Latin, a dead language. Why would the church speak in Latin, a dead language, to all of its parishioners unless it didn't want them to know what the Bible said, right? So churches, religions don't teach the Bible.
And Clint, there's a long history. The Catholic Church has a really long history of burning Christians alive for wanting to read or possessing the Bible.
Absolutely, and
Popes would write papal special encyclicals condemning Bible societies in particular. And I just have I have a request, Clint. Just could you, if you have that link of the those busts in the Capitol, could you email it to me to the Gmail, and then just I have some people who are requesting it to be put in the live chat here.
Sure.
That's,
give me a minute
profound, for that. Even with the Hammurabi codes and with the popes, like multiple popes in the on busts, and this is
you might have to search the. I'll give you the full thing that I copied from the website. You might have to search the actual sentence in order to find it, because it's not easy to find some of this shit, So I'll give you the link, and then I'll give you the So dog Latin. The reason they call it dog Latin is because it's. I mean, this is how it's defined in Black's Law Fourth. Okay, the Latin of illiterate persons. Latin words put together on the English grammatical system. So we're speaking a very bestial, low-level form of Latin. Okay, called English. When we speak, they hear Latin. They hear law Latin. But we don't know what we're saying. This is why we can't do anything in the legal system. It's why I started studying it, because I figured out there was 3 different versions. Now, when I go to the word Latin, the language of the ancient Romans, there are 3 sorts of law Latin. There's good Latin, which you might be, you could call it conversational Latin or common Latin, allowed by the grammarians and lawyers. Okay? There's false or incongruous Latin, which in times past would abate original writs, though it would not make void any judicial writ, declaration, or plea, which is basically, if you consider that's what we speak in court, when we go to a judge who is of course in law Latin, right, has a complete grasp on the law Latin, which we're going to cover here in a minute, and he knows that we're speaking dog Latin or false or incongruous Latin, if you will, he's not going to avoid the whole court case, because then all law would have to be void, because no frickin', no illiterate person in the United States knows law Latin. I don't even know it, and I study it all the time, right? So no one knows Latin except them. So they accept this false or incongruous Latin, which is us speaking dog Latin or English, to try to get our point across. And we say the right words, the words that are in the legal dictionary, and so it's acceptable. In other words, though it would not make void any judicial writ, declaration, or plea. We speak this mongrel language of dogs, basically, illiterate persons, as they call us. Now, there's the third kind, and this is the kind that I'm always trying to teach people, because this is what gets us in trouble, is the words of art, terms of art, or words of art, known only to the sages of the law. Well, what is Latin? The language of the ancient Romans. They are the Roman sages of today, right? So words of art are terms of art, very important word, right? They're a term, and known only to the sages of law and not to the grammarians, right? Not to everyone else, in other words. Not unless you are part of the system of law or someone like me who has barely scratched the surface of all this stuff, it seems. You know, we're completely screwed because we speak the lowest form of the language that we're calling law Latin. Um, and it's also called lawyers Latin. So when we go to court, they're speaking lawyers Latin. We're speaking false or incongruous Latin. Not even good Latin. We're speaking dog Latin, the Latin of illiterate persons put together on the English grammatical system, and that's our whole problem. We don't even realize there's these versions, that there's this disconnect between what we're saying and what the actual words mean. And I guarantee you, every legal term means something different than what you think.
Oh, very well said, Clint. It's like the and like this is to the this goes to the Jesuit Ignatius Loyola's maxim that they'll turn white into black and black into white.
Exactly.
That's the ultimate inversion of this legal system that we're seeing. And I've just noticed that, and I'd say like the Jesuits are like the ultimate gatekeepers of this Roman
Oh, sure,
legal
sure.
system. And that's why, at least in the United States, like almost all of, I think I sent you the bio of Edward Bennett Williams. This guy was probably the most powerful trial attorney like in the American 20th century. Almost, I'll bring up some of the names here because this is a recurring theme that all of like the power lawyers that represent all of like the quote unquote deep state power corporate interests all have a nexus with Rome in some way, and that's because they, you know, it's a very select few that actually know all of this, you know, Latin, you know, innuendo that they've created through their control system. Like there's I have Bennett Williams as a page here. He founded the law firm Williams and Connolly, one of the most power firms in Washington. And this guy owned the Redskins and the Orioles, Washington Redskins, Baltimore Orioles. Studied law at Jesuit Georgetown. Was educated at Jesuit Holy Cross. Was treasurer of the Democratic National Committee and a Knight of Malta. But right on Wikipedia, I'm just going to name some of Edward Bennett Williams' clients, and you can see that these plugged-in Roman lawyers, you know, are the true gatekeepers in this society. So Edward Bennett Williams represented Sam Giancana, John Hinckley Jr., Frank Sinatra, Robert Vesco, the Playboy publisher, or Robert Hesco. He represented Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner, spy Igor Melich, Jimmy Hoffa, organized crime figure Frank Costello, oil commodity trader Mark Rich, U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy, corporate raider Victor Posner, Mike Milken, and the Reverend Sung Mung Moon, who is the CIA cult leader. So that's quite a rap sheet, and you know, the examples of this abound. Like actually, I have the footage on my channel. But when Oliver North, this ties into the national emergency and suspending the Constitution. When Oliver North was testifying to the Senate in the '80s, his lawyer that he took with him, his name was Brendan Sullivan Jr. Brendan Sullivan, like Edward Bennett Williams, went to Jesuit Georgetown, and there's a famous clip. It's only like a minute and a half or so, but I have it on my channel, where Congressman Jack Brooks is questioning Oliver North about his plans to suspend the United States Constitution in the matter of a national emergency. And the Jesuit-trained lawyer Brendan Sullivan actually calls out Mr. Chairman. The chairman was Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. The Jesuit-trained lawyer Sullivan actually calls out to the chairman, and the chairman shuts down Jack Brooks, saying, "You're not allowed to look into this at this stage." So it actually came out right into the plan. This was right around like the Rex 84 era. But so Brendan Sullivan's another big one. If you look at his clients, he represents all sorts of deep state interests.
The ultimate power, the power to undermine, right? That is power. Is to say, no longer you can look at that. Nope, we can't make that public. We can't do that. That is the ultimate power, is the power to undermine, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's it. The whole, and it's a farce. It shows the whole, controls. You can just suspend the rule of law whenever you want. It's a joke, and it's not a coincidence. I think that a lot of the countries that have a history of just going full out martial law are very Roman Catholic countries, like the Philippines, for instance. Actually, right now in the Philippines, two of the three islands are in a state of martial law right now under
Right. Well,
under
so
Duterte. And Duterte was educated by Jesuit priests. The Dominican Republic has a concordat with the Vatican. In that concordat, the Vatican is referred to as an international legal personality,
yes.
which shows to that kind of highlights everything that we've said, that they're a secular international religion, like they're a secular political religion. But like the Dominican Republic has a long history of military rule. Argentina, a very Catholic country, a long history of martial law being in place. Brazil, Spain. Look at like the history of the Inquisitions, like how Catholic Louis XIV would use his paramilitary dragonnades force. Almost all Catholic societies are militarized societies. Poland has a long history of martial law, and that's why there's no coincidence that like the bishops have an archdiocese in the United States military called the Archdiocese for the Military Services. Kind of unprecedented power. And I'll just mention and I find even the non-Jesuitically educated or Catholic war hawks in the U.S. all bow down to the system, like Henry Kissinger. Like a lot of people don't know Kissinger was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University.
And yet everybody calls him a Jew.
Absolutely, and at the I mentioned this earlier on the stream at the Al Smith dinner. Al Smith IV joked that that Kissinger was a Catholic, for instance. It's so. Another example, Madeleine Albright, who famously said that like she justified the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children on CBS. She's not Catholic, she's Jewish, but she's been teaching at Georgetown for like 20 years, like the Jesuits Power Center. So almost everyone, kisses this ring, even if they're not openly. Like, doesn't matter.
Well, but we talked about that.
Or whatever.
We talked about that last time. That all these different sort of organizations, or from the Masons to they're all part of the same. They're just fingers of the same hand. So doing their part, to support or be the controlled opposition, right? Even when they seem to be absolutely against one another, they're not at all. So let me just say this one thing too, and then we really need to get into the foundation of the national emergency and why it is that is the case. Why is the word emergency so important is really the question. So keep in mind that we got to go by the Bible. We don't go by religion or doctrine. We go by the Bible, which says don't take any other doctrine. And the reason that the Catholics, the reason that religions, period, and especially the Jews who do not accept the Word of God or Jesus Christ personified, the reason as their savior, the law, in other words, as their savior, is because of this one very important part. Now, this is in every chapter of the Bible. It's all over the place, but this really gives you a sense of why I keep telling people that the Bible and the legal language are two completely separate things, but they're also antagonistic. So they, you can't have good without bad. You can't have left without right, up without down, good without evil. You have to have that antagonistic thing for your system to work. So they put the Bible as the foundation, not the source, but the foundation of common law, and then they add everything to it. And then we enter into civil law through the birth contract. We become persons, or we pretend to be, and the rest is history. Here's what the Bible says. Remember, when we're talking about a corporation is a person. What do they say? Persons have rights. Persons have this. Persons have that. Persons are just like people, but they're not. The plural of person is persons, not people, because people and persons are not the same thing. A person is an artifice. It's a fiction. So, and you have to understand, all this stuff you're reading is fiction. It's their own fiction. Justinian, Hammurabi, these are all the fictions, the The law is fiction. It's a work of fiction. And that's what they control. This is why, it says God is truth. And if you want to be free, you have to worship truth, and you have to be in truth, and you have to worship in spirit truth. I mean, the whole thing makes so much sense when you apply the correct understanding of the words, especially. But to do that, you have to understand what those words mean. So here's what the Bible says about persons, which all of us are. Anybody that's a Catholic is a person of a nation, and the Pope is a person. The church is a person. Okay, that's what a state is. So, if you call on the Father without respect of persons, judges according every man's work. Have not, my brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ with respect of persons. James 2:1. Romans 2:11. For there is no respect of persons with God. Job 32:21. Let me not, I pray you, accept any man's person, neither let me give flattering titles unto any man. That's another one. No flattering titles. That includes Pope. That includes minister.
When the Pope does that, like when the Pope gives out a knighthood, like the knight when he makes like let's say an aristocrat or a businessman or a leader, a knight of Malta, a knight of Saint Gregory, a knight of Sylvester. These are flattering titles.
Absolutely, everything in legal is a flattering title. Citizen, Christian is a very much a flattering title, and that's why it warns against it and actually uses it as an insult. Meaning hypocrite. You're a Christian, but you're not following the law of God. You're not following Christ in any way. You're not following the law of God or the word of God in any way. So it goes on. Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak in respect of want, I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. In other words, never call myself anything that what I am. I'm a man or a son of God following the law of God, or I'm not. If I'm not, chances are I'm calling myself by person or title. James 2:9. But if you have respect to persons, ye commit sin and are convinced of the law of transgressors. I mean, it's right there. Proverbs 28:21. To have respect of persons is not good. For a piece of bread that man will transgress. And that describes the whole population of earth that's been bound up in nations.
I'm saying, and when we respect persons, like I know, like there's another verse, the book of Matthew, I believe. I pardon if I'm not getting the proper verse. It says, "Call no man your father," that instead of like your father in heaven. But the word Pope comes from Papa, the Latin,
Exactly.
which literally means father.
Father, right?
But only I guess in a quote unquote fallen world where we've all been injected, or using the term of the Jesuit educated philosopher Martin Heidegger, Dasein, we've been deposited or thrown into the legal system. Only after that happens can we as a society.
The legal system has to die. So just to be clear, now several legal scholars, the one I can think of offhand, I can't think of his name. He has his own dictionary, but the way they define legal is the undoing of God's law, the undoing of nature, basically. In other words, the undoing of all moral compass is the legal system, because the legal law.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there. Is this why devils or lawyers are referred to as devil's advocates? Is this that?
I can read you. I can read you why that's actually the case if you want. I have it. I have it in storage here. Would you like me to?
Yeah, I think that's. I think that'd be worthwhile. I believe. I need to. I don't pretend to be like a versed biblical scholar or anything, but I do believe there's a biblical foundation for the lawyers being referred to as devil's advocates or adversaries.
That goes back to the papal stuff as well. But there's a more, there's advocatus diaboli, right? The ecclesiastical law, the devil's advocate. And that's the advocate who argues against the canonization of a saint. So it's your controlled opposition again, right? So if you're the devil's advocate and you're arguing against the canonization of a saint, well, what does that mean? Devil's advocate, the devil's horns are, well, okay, let's get to the important one. What is deviling? Now, this is right out of Black's Fourth. Black's Fourth is more of a secondary dictionary for law in courts, but what it is a historical dictionary. It's more important to know that than to use it for current, stuff, current cases. The Black's Law line of dictionaries is more of a historical purview of the words used. Deviling is a term used. This is how it's defined: a term used in London of a barrister, in other words, an attorney, a lawyer, recently admitted to the bar, who assists a junior barrister in his professional work without compensation and without appearing in any way in the matter. Okay, so they just said that being a lawyer who's admitted to the bar and assisting a junior barrister who's not quite yet there is called deviling, right? That in itself is pretty scary. But let's go to the source. Let's go. Why is it called deviling, or why is an attorney known as a devil? And this is not me. This is from the. This is a site. I'm going to read this because it's from my book. Okay, the second book that I haven't published or released, from the Advocate's website in Scotland, which before the release of this work and only after the following was read live on air and on radio and reposted multiple times by myself and many other hosts before me and after me, only after the link was passed to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of us goyim out here, right, in the United Kingdom, we find the shocking reality behind this seemingly disparaging title of devil. Why is an attorney a devil? All right, now this is the Faculty of Advocates is a body of independent lawyers who have been admitted to practice as advocates before the courts of Scotland. Faculty records date back as far as 1532, when the College of Justice was established by an act of Scottish Parliament through its origins, though its origins are believed to predate the event. So this is copied from that website, which was advocates.org.uk. It no longer exists. However, there is, if you can find it out there, and I think I have a copy if anybody wants it on my other computer. It's called The Devil's Handbook, 12th edition, 2014-15, published by the Faculty of Advocates, Advocates Library, Parliament House, Edinburgh, EH11RF. Okay, this is from page 11 of that publication called The Devil's Handbook. Okay, again, this was taken down, and it doesn't surprise me. Here's what it says. Deviling, as the period of pupillage or training to become an advocate, in other words, an attorney or lawyer, is generally known, lasts between 8 and 9 months and comprises a mix of skills, training courses, and time spent working with a devil master, one word. The compulsory skills training courses, which are described in more detail in the following pages, are spread across the deviling period. Remember, we just defined deviling in Black's Fourth, and last for about 9 weeks in total. For the balance of the period of deviling, devils work closely with their devil masters. One is an attorney who has not quite reached the point. This is almost like a doctor being a resident for a while until he becomes a full-fledged, work alone doctor. But it's only for that short amount of period of time. During that time, they're called devils. Ones who have already surpassed that and are in the bar are called devil masters. All devils have a principal devil master who is a practicing member of the junior bar of at least 7 years standing and working primarily in civil practices. Devil will also, the devil, right, the trainee, will also spend part of the time with another devil master practicing in the criminal courts, and many devils spend a short period of time with a third devil master working in a different aspect of civil work from his or her principal devil master. In order to take a devil master must be approved by the dean of faculty. A clerk of faculty maintains a list of approved devil masters. All right, so this is no joke, right? During the period of deviling, devils carry out work and free representation and all this different stuff. It doesn't really get any more clear than the fact that deviling is a specifically defined term in law, that attorneys are literally called devils, that their teachers are called devil masters, right? That's where you get devil's advocate, right? You get all these terms. This is what is the devil, Well, look up the word. You'll be surprised what it actually says. It's an evil genius, or genius meaning sort of like a species, like a plant species, like the genus of the plant, right? So you're talking about something that is right out there, but not known to the public generally. Because how could you possibly take it seriously, or again, how could a Christian, a true follower of Christ, possibly involve themselves in something like this? It doesn't make sense, right? It's crazy.
Well, absolutely. I would just say, like, it's. I know, like, there was a bar here in St. Catharines that closed. That I think it was called like something along the lines like Devil's Advocate, and in the logo of the bar, it had like the the trident in the logo. And downtown Toronto, there's a bar called Devil's Advocate, right in downtown Toronto. So it's kind of like, the point being that, like, what you just described it's kind of hidden in plain sight right in our culture, just with like the names of businesses, like, and like anything, like just all the various titles that
It's
applied.
just like the busts of the lawgivers that we never see. This is Parliament, right? That I'm reading from the faculty of. This is where the devils go to train, the lawyers go to train, right? So yeah, it's in the open, it's in the hall, it's in the very Parliament where things get done, but it's never seen. It's never shown to us, and that's how this is the open secret type of thing that, like I said, as soon as we started talking about this years ago, I mean, 7, 8 years ago, I think we were talking, maybe not that long, 5 years ago, we, we were talking about this, and then suddenly it's gone. I'm like, I can't point people to it anymore, but I do have the Devil's Handbook somewhere on my on my drives. So it's just nuts, and I'm sure you can find it on the internet too.
Well, and just like, you could say, metaphorically, well, even like there was an article, like one of the like a Vatican. I think this guy was like one of the exorcists. He actually came out and said the devil lives in Rome, like at the Vatican. That came out in 2012. And I'm just going to screen share here because I was in Cleveland, Ohio not too long ago, and I just, further proof of this, who these lawyers serve. Well, here's one here. Here's a statue of Pope Innocent X overlooking the signing of the EU Constitution in Rome, a constitution, doubtlessly drawn up by lawyers. But this was October 29th, 2004. Here was the photo here of a courthouse that I was outside of in Cleveland on July 15th. And there was probably 8 of these fasces in total surrounding the building.
You can see the one below it too, supporting the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So this is metaphorically like the foundation of law is the Roman.
It's force. In other words, it's binding force.
Well, actually, and Pope Leo the 13th, in his famous encyclical Septinae Christianae in 1890, said that force is the most ideal way to preserve public tranquility and order. That's a quote from Pope Leo the 13th, and actually this came out right along. That was 8 years before the city of Brooklyn was incorporated.
Well, and that's how they
fasces and the Roman god.
Oh yeah, it's in all of the incorporate documents. Yeah, it's crazy, and people don't even understand that cities and counties and states are corporations in the first place. So they don't even look at the at the seal that always says incorporated in this year. You go to the Chicago bus stops, and it says right there with this in the seal, it says incorporated 18 whatever. It's nuts, right? So, what the hell was I just gonna say? I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Oh, no worries at all. It's just the point being that, and like when you study the whole system, like the way that the statute of limitation laws have been incorporated into the legal system, it's systematically set in place to protect, like pedophiles and the criminals in general, but in particular, like the pedophiles at the Roman Catholic Church, who like recently, and due to like the statute of limitation laws in Pennsylvania, like I don't know if you saw, there was a big Attorney General report that came out in 2018 that listed like 300 to 350 pedophile priests in the report, detailed report, like over 1,000 pages, and they only charged two of them, two charges out of 350 due to the statute of limitations. Because in the state of Pennsylvania, I think it was the after like some states it's as little as like 3 years. After like 3 years in some states, if you don't bring the claim of abuse to the police or the courts, then like you have no chance at seeking justice. The perpetrator can go away free. And like so, a lot of kids so how can you expect a kid who's like 7 years old, raped by a Catholic priest, to file a report by the time he's 10 years old? He's not going to do that if he's a kid. The whole way that the legal system is set up is to protect the Roman Catholic Church, and that's why in many states, like the priests don't have to disclose what's in the confessional to the civil courts, because they don't want to violate the sacred oath of the confessional. There's supposedly a separation of church and state, in America, but that happens in a lot of states. If a priest has information of abuse taking place in the confessional, they have no obligation whatsoever to give that up to the civil courts. But these rules, don't apply to non-priests. And we can go into like the income tax, and they don't have to pay any income tax laws. For the reason being, because it's their legal system, and that's why they're given special immunities.
Well, so this goes back again. You gotta understand, they're king of their own creation. That's why they're called gods. If you look at the word God, and the whole problem with most people in religions is that they believe in God, but God is never defined. Like you might say the prayer, hallowed be thy name, referring to God, and most people don't know what that name is. I mean, do you? You should. If you're going to make the prayer, you're going to stand up and chant, which the Bible says not to, and you're going to say, hallowed be thy name. Well, what's the name of God? Most people will say, well, there is no name of God, or I don't like to put names on things, but yet it's in the Bible. It's called Jehovah, YHVH, the old ancient tetragrammaton, right? Very important, and I'm going to do a whole show on that here coming up. But the fact that you would say a prayer that hallowed be thy name and then not even know that there's the name of God, then you look at the word God as it's defined, and a God is, of course, Jehovah, the supreme being, the highest, and then a false God, which can be just about anybody in power. And it lists specifically magistrate, and magistrate lists presidents, kings, popes, lawyers, or excuse me, not lawyers, but judges, mayors. Anybody that has power is a god. And so all the times where the king translated the word Jehovah or anything else into the word God, you got like 30 different words that mean the same, that are translated into God but mean different things. Most of the time they're kings or magistrates, judges, whatever, the Sanhedrin, right? They're all considered gods. And so people who read the Bible and they see the word God, they always think it means the same thing, and therefore they blame God for all these horrible things that men did who are called gods by different names. Theos means godlike. There's the Elohim, which are the gods of the Babylonian gods, right? So many different gods that are, and they're all under the name God or Lord or whatever. So there's this whole disconnect that people don't even know the name of God. Again, that notion of the tetragrammaton. And like I said, I'm going to do a whole discourse on that and why it's so important. It's not Yahweh. It's not all these different things that people have come up with. And the point is, back to this respect of persons. How can they have force? Well, they give men a flattering. They give you personhood, right? They make you a debt slave, and then they give you a flattering title. You're a soldier. You're a sergeant. You're a corporal. You're whatever you are in the military. Well, they did the same thing in the feudal age. They just called you a knight, right? You would be part of the king's or the landlord's army, and you'd be called a knight. You'd be granted certain lands, and in return for your service, plus the tax you pay, which would have been maybe the hay you grow, the alfalfa or whatever you grow on your land, you had this status, right? And that's exactly how they keep control over everybody else. Is that some of us will allow ourselves to be prostitutes, to be military men who work in the standing army of the nation or the king. Well, gosh, you might want to go read the Declaration of Independence, where one of the big complaints is that there was a standing army, in other words, a national army, a federal army of the king all over the colonies, all over the states, right? So the states being the people. Biggest complaint, and yet gosh, there's no state militias anymore, are there? That means that we have a standing army in United States Corporation, Washington, D.C. And if you read the Lieber Code, the presence of a military base extends the laws of war, laws of emergency. So let's go into that because I don't have a lot of time left, and we really need to cover this.
Oh yeah, and just before with the latest, this was I think achieved post 9/11 with the Bush's emergency declarations and executive orders, but the president is the commander in chief of the militia.
No, that's not. That's the Civil War was
it goes back then even too. Yeah.
So yeah, because there was no. You see, the Union broke. The Congress was kaput. Once the Southern states quit the Union, there was no longer any United States. There was no longer a union, so Congress was defunct. That was basically the end of the true notion of the United States, and that's when the union, like I said, it incorporated, right, and it became this big beast, and all the northern states stayed on the side of the corporation, fought on its behalf like mercenaries, and and that's all because, and I'll pull it up for you. It's
an interesting side with the history. There's lots of evidence out there, and history has shown that the papacy was actually kind of the puppet master of the Civil War, and they're actually they wanted to basically divide and polarize the American nation to then, after the bloodbath, come in and then turn it into a corporation. But if people aren't aware, the Pope Pius IX was essentially writing love letters to Jefferson Davis.
Well, here's executive order.
I was going to say the popes were very big on keeping the black slave trade in place. The evidence for that is the book Slavery and Catholicism by Richard Roscoe Miller.
I'll tell you, I'd be curious. You should do a little thing on Lincoln, because Lincoln said, I have no purpose directly or indirectly to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I don't believe I have a right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. And, there was the original 13th Amendment, which was to institute slavery in all states, to stop any ban on slavery. So, I mean, if that would have, and that was when the Civil War started, the southern states were, I believe it or not, and I know this is hard to take for most people, but the southern states were actually on the side of the slave. What Hollywood portrays as slavery and what actually was happening are two different things. The United States wanted to do exactly what it did, which was gobble up all the slaves and create them as citizens, and then turn all of us into that lower class, which is exactly what they did through the birth certificate. So if you read the reasons that the states in the South were actually getting out of the Union, it's because they were very protective of their slaves, and they said, look, you can read this right on the legislative websites, that, hey, you're trying to put these slaves into a society that is not going to welcome them, not going to support them. You're not giving them any kind of citizenship. You're just saying let them free, and they have no place to go. They've spent their whole lives working. And I know this, I'm not justifying slavery. I'm saying the true demonization of the South is actually it's actually the opposite. You should be demonizing the North because the North was exploiting the South for its slave labor. The North wanted slavery and finally passed the actual 13th Amendment. But because the Civil War started, you can read about this. Because the actual Civil War started, the 13th Amendment was never ratified by the states. That 13th Amendment from those northern states actually said slavery is legal across the board. Anybody can have slaves where it's legal.
Well,
Right? So that,
I'm just saying it's historical fact that even like George Washington had slaves.
of course.
Many of the founders were slaveholders. So
The history, though,
just I was saying that the slaves in the South were kind of put in like a no-win situation because like doubtlessly some of the Confederate business owners probably treated them with dignity, but many did not. So, but on the other
and
side,
I'm not here to argue.
I'm just saying on the other side though. So like they're kind of in a no-win situation because if they stay in the South, many of them are persecuted, and if many of them go to the North, they would still ultimately end up being persecuted, and they may not have as much of like a foundation.
Well, yeah, no, you'd actually have to read all the grievances that those southern states put forward on behalf of the slaves to understand that they were taking care and were required by law to take care of these slaves. What you see in this Jewish-dominated, history that you see in Hollywood and all these movies that portray slaves as so poor, it's not the reality of the situation for the slaves themselves. Right, you had slaves living, over 100 years old. So there's something, they had to take care of them when their retirement. There was all these, believe it or not, there was all these benefits. Now I'm not arguing for it against it. I'm saying it's good or bad. I'm only interested in the truth, the facts. And when I see the original 13th Amendment that could very well be in place today, and everyone I know that's black could be a slave today. All right. But because we fought against it, because the South said, no, we're not going to allow this to happen, and we went to war on behalf of the slaves. See, this is what pisses me off about this revisioning of history, that we don't have any idea, and we demonize something that we shouldn't be demonized. But that's a whole nother story. I've done a lot of work on that too. But like I said, Lincoln was not about getting rid of the slaves. That's a big, fat, freaking lie. My point is, his executive orders, this is just one of them, May 18th, 1864, says this is executive order by Lincoln, you will take possession by military force of the printing establishments of the New York World and Journal of Commerce, and prohibit any further publication thereof. Oh, what happened to freedom of the press? Well, in an emergency, anytime the president makes an executive order by emergency, there is no rights. Everything is suspended. The Constitution doesn't mean anything. You are therefore commanded forthwith to arrest and imprison the editors, proprietors, and publishers of the aforementioned newspapers. Right. So this is the true history that no one ever talks about. Here's Lincoln again. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. This is Lincoln, who we treasure, and who is responsible for creating the amendment, the 13th Amendment, the first one that didn't get go through because the war started, of putting all these slaves and securing slavery. The history is a big lie that we see because
Clint just in the book Slavery and Catholicism by Richard Roscoe Miller, he actually identified the only group that like publicly like came out and said we're unequivocally against slavery was actually the Seventh-day Adventists. So it wasn't just, the point being, like, it wasn't just sadly, like, it wasn't just a Catholic problem. And he quotes like even like the Quakers, the Mennonites, many of the Protestant evangelical groups in America.
No, it boils down to one thing, right? You're not treating these people as men. You're treating them as property. You're treating them legally. You're saying by legal right, the undoing of God's law, I'm going to treat you as something other than a creation of God. And by legal right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to kill all the whales. I'm going to destroy the fish. I'm going to pollute everything. By legal right, I'm going to spill oil and not clean it up because government is my main shareholder and they're certainly not going to take the loss. I'm going to do everything I can to completely screw up the environment because I have the legal right. I don't have the moral right. I don't have like God's permission, right? Because yeah, you're not going to get it. But you see, if you take personhood, you become a corporation under government who says basically that it's supported by God, right? Isn't that the story of every nation? When we go to war, we say, "Hey, we're in the name of God, we're going to do this." Look up every state constitution. In the name of God, we're doing this. We're creating this state, right? Everything but the actual constitution refers to God, right? Even the Declaration of Independence, but not the Constitution. It's purely secular, as all constitutions are. All constitutions are Masonic. There's look at the Book of Constitutions. It's a Masonic document. They're all
Well, Clint, just do you know the year of the publication? Because interestingly, the Jesuits also have a book of constitutions, which is very
I don't think there's any
revered.
difference. I mean, to be honest, again, they're fingers of the same hand. But I mean, you can look. I think there's several versions. Let me. I gotta pull something up here.
No, it's a great point, and all of like you people. I'll even link the Wikipedia page. Like, it lists probably 35 countries. Every single nation state in the world today has the ability to suspend their constitution in an event of a national emergency. And like we said, the national emergency declaration prerogatives date back to the Roman Republic. It probably goes, like you said, it probably goes back to the Hammurabi, but
right, because the establishment of any government essentially is it always was a monarchy. First of all, I mean, you had a king and queen who claimed sovereignty, right? The Bible says, claim no sovereignty, call no one your father except God. Well, that's what they were doing. They were taking the place of God. Let me read this. Oh, you know what? Yeah, this is from. Okay, so I have a very vast selection of Bibles. I have the Geneva Bible. I have the King James. I have the 1611. I have all these different Bibles. One of the Bibles I picked up along the way is a 1942 Masonic. It's called the Holy Masonic Bible 1942. Okay, and in it has a bunch of pictures and transcriptions and notes. Here's what it says, and it's a quote, of course, because it is the Masonic Bible. It's a quote, an excerpt from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. It's one of the first pages. It says this is not the quote I want, but it's a good one anyway. All religions express symbolism. All language is symbolic. All words have primarily a material sense, however, they may afterward get for the ignorant a spiritual nonsense, which is what has happened to Christianity in general. Christianity taught the doctrine of fraternity, but repudiated that of political equality by continually inculcating obedience to Caesar. Christianity told you to be obedient to Caesar, which again is against the Bible. And to those lawfully in authority. What does the church teach? It teaches follow the law of the land. It doesn't, because the Bible would say no, take no other doctrine, and doctrine means law. But what do the churches teach? What does every church I've ever been to? Follow the law of man. Follow the law of, or the doctrine of land. Of the law
I think many of the churches I've seen, like they'll actually quote the Bible, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, to justify like the Peter's pence, like all of the financial collecting of the churches, and like they'll use that verse I've seen to justify all of the worldly monetary gain.
Yeah, and that verse is telling you to give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, so that you can worship Jehovah God without the legal system, without personhood, without all that crap. You would not. And those verses I was reading you, one of those verses says, "Do not ever worship Jesus Christ while in person." He's right there in the Bible. You cannot be in the legal system, which is the undoing of God's law, and also be a follower of Christ, which is God's law. Right? I mean, it's so apparently self-evidently clear, but if you take it literally and you consider it a history and you don't take it for what it is, which is a moral story to teach you the moral law, then you're gonna lose perspective, and you're gonna listen to men who take that verse and say, "Well, see, it says give to Caesar what is Caesar's." That's not what it means. It means give back Caesar's person. Give back the status you've gained, the legal titles that you've gained in society, and give to God what is God's. You see, they don't tell you that part. They just use it to express, because what are they? They're corporations of the state. They are part of the state. They are part of Caesar. They're incorporated under it. They have to follow the law of man because they're not true churches. They're not people. They
Well,
can't follow the law of God. They're fiction.
I'm just saying a verse that kind of puzzled me, and just I didn't mean to cut you off there. Just I don't know. I'll have to. I think this verse would be interesting just to study to see when this verse was injected. I can't speak Latin or Aramaic, but I want to see how the original verse in Romans 13 is translated, where it says, "The powers that be are ordained by God," because that is the papacy's and the Jesuits' bread and butter verse to refer to justify all of the
but you have to
church state tyranny that has,
and that's why, like I said, all the constitutions they begin that way. Every nation in the world that goes to war with each other, they both have God on their side. So which one's right? Well, it's just they're saying that because but what that really refers to is when I don't think that all kingdoms or kings were necessarily bad. What I think is the problem is that we, as Plato describes in his 5 regimes, you cannot keep an aristocracy no more than you can keep a true tyranny. Right? The tyranny is short-lived and the aristocracy is short-lived, generally one generation, because the son is never the father. Right? The father, when you're talking about going from tyranny to starting a new kingdom and becoming king of that kingdom, you've experienced the tyranny. You know what it's like. Then you have a son, and the son says, "Well, why are we doing this? I don't know what tyranny is. I'm going to go into the bank accounts." The king is like the priest class who holds nothing, pure aristocracy, and takes care of his people. But suddenly the son comes along who has no experience in war or famine or tyranny and says, "Well, we've got all this money, all the public trust is here. We could, take a little here." And then it turns into a democracy, and then it turns into a democracy, and democracy ultimately, according to everything I've ever read, goes into tyranny. And then from tyranny you have the spiritual awakening, which is kind of what we're starting to experience, I think, right now. And then you start going back down the chain, because that pure aristocracy, that pure sort of the king who follows God's law and has the spiritual awakening and wants to do the right thing, can never come again from the son. You can try to teach experience, but you just can't. That's why your child, inevitably, you can tell them, they don't touch that stove. Don't touch that stove when it's hot. But they have to experience it to understand it, right? So the child is not going to take your warning seriously. When you tell them don't use all this public wealth to your own benefit, they're going to be like, "Why would I do that? And besides, you died. I'm king now. I can do whatever I want. I don't know what the consequences. You tell me what the consequences are going to be." But I don't really have to, I don't believe that's going to happen to my kingdom. And then he has a son, and he's even worse. And isn't that what we're dealing with today? Aren't we at the very bottom of the drag of what they call the swamp? Everybody in Congress is related. There was an article that said 40-something senators were related to Obama. They were cousins, and that he'd eventually show that all of them were. They're all the same family. They're all passing on through nepotism these offices. You have Ron Paul. You have Ron Paul Jr. You have all the Rockefeller line. You have all these people acting in Congress. Schiff, right? These are all the same bloodline. The presidents that are running, you had Bush and Bush and Cheney, Bush and what was his name? Carey, ninth cousins.
Oh yeah,
You
they're
have
both of them are bonesmen. Imagine like, that's kind of a
well, that's not what's important. It's their bloodline. They're directly of the kings of England. They all are. Hillary and Trump. On my blog, I've got the official data that they're of the same family. They're cousins. They're like practically. I don't want to say brother and sister, but they're just the same ilk.
well, you know,
They're. I mean, after a while, like I said, you go down from that highest level of goodness that comes from badness, and eventually you get down to the point where it's nothing but badness, and that's where we are now with our leaders, because it's nepotism. They have no experience in being good. They come from bad people in the first place, and we don't realize it because we think we have the right to vote when we don't. It's all a lie. And so these same bloodlines keep getting into the, and I'm not just saying this, this is all my research. I've been doing it for years. So you you're in a situation right now where we're about to have this tyrannical thing, and then we'll reawaken, but we'll be a lesser nation, right? We'll go back to that top level, and for a very short while we might have this great place after many of us, die or whatever. But rest assured that circular system has been going on in every civilization that ever existed. It's the same thing. And you know what? What's his name noted that there's never been anything, I think, that lived past 250 years. You had the Roman Republic, which died
well, I
and
think
became
the
the
Republic.
Roman Empire.
The Republic was kind of like, I think that was around 500 years, and then it was kind of it quickly kind of formed into like an Eastern and Western Roman Empire. But yeah, you're right. Most empires, though, that are true global empires, don't ever last over like, usually 300 years. But yeah, I believe the Roman Republic is the longest standing empire.
Yeah, it was like 200 and something years, but it never goes past. No empire, including the United States, is has gone past this 200 and something year mark. And the point was, hey, if we continue on like this, the same exact thing has happened, and it's because of that cycle that you know. Have you heard, for instance, the Alexander? Oh, let me pull it up because I think this is so important. Oh, I know it's in here.
Speaking of Alexander, while you're pulling that up in the book that I've referenced a couple times, Slavery and Catholicism, he actually reprints a bull that Pope Alexander VI, and the Borgia is one of these families that you mentioned that are the ruling elites. There is a Borgia that was president of Ecuador just in the 1990s, and he was a great friend of George H.W. Bush. But Borgia actually, in his bull Inter Carrera, he basically he proclaimed that North and South America were church property of Rome, and Christopher Columbus is referred to as a son of the Catholic Church, and it's a really interesting document to understand. And this is the reason why President Teddy Roosevelt, when he was speaking to the Knights of Columbus at Carnegie Hall in 1907, he said that Christopher Columbus was one of the true founders of this country. For that being, and that's why it all kind of comes full circle. Today in America, I believe Columbus Day is to actually celebrate Roman Catholicism.
Exactly. It goes like this. Scottish historian Alexander Tytler, or Lord Woodhouseley, in the early 1800s, this is his theory, the cyclic sort of spiral of every empire. And yeah, I was right. 250 years is the max it's ever been, or no, 267 years is the max it's ever been, and that was the Mamluk Empire. Roman Republic was 233 years. Roman Empire was 207. The Persia 208, Syria 247, and United States 230, 240, something like that. But the Ottoman Empire 250, Spain 250, Romanov Russia 234 years, Great Britain 250 years. See, it's all this same cyclical thing, and here's the cycle. Here's the cycle that he came up with. he says a democracy is always temporary in nature. And if you look at all the quotes from the founding fathers, as we call them, they're all against freaking democracy. Democracy is not what our system is. It's not supposed to be. Democracy is horrible. I could read you all the quotes. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will always continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury, and that's your special interest groups and corporations. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury. Isn't that the truth? With the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy. It couldn't possibly be looser than it is now, which is always followed by a dictatorship, which is a reference to Plato's 5 regimes. Here's what he says. Here's the cycle, okay? Like I said, from bondage, or if you will, tyranny, to spiritual faith. And that is the process I think we're starting to go through right now. We're going from this horrible thing we call democracy, which allows the worst things to possibly happen because you're tricking the public into voting yes or no for something. And giving them the consent. So you go from bondage to spiritual faith. Now you have that aristocracy, the priest class taking care of everyone else and not getting any benefit from it except, the castle or whatever. From bondage to spiritual faith, then we start immediately going down after a generation. From spiritual faith to great courage. From courage to liberty. Right? It's something we talk about all the time in America. Liberty, liberty, liberty. From liberty to abundance. We've kicked the ass of the Indians and anybody that wants to challenge us. And now we have abundance. And that's where it just all goes downhill. From abundance to complacency. Oh, yeah, we already, our forefathers did that. We don't have to do anything. From complacency to apathy, right? From apathy to dependence, which is where we are now, and from dependence back into bondage. And the only place to go from bondage is back up to having a spiritual awakening, a spiritual faith, where we correct things, if only for a generation. And then we start going down again. And, what happens? A new power arises. Whether it's the Arab Empire for 246 years or, whoever comes, Greece at 231 years. It's the same every time. It's called revolution. And what happens in a revolution? Starts here, goes all the way around the cycle. Oh, bondage to spiritual faith. And then we start again, except now it's moved over here. And that's why they say Rome is kind of a moving concept, right? It's not a real thing or a substantial thing. It's whatever power structure goes in, kind of like we portray aliens, right, in movies. They go in, they trick the people, they deplete them of all their wealth and power and natural resources, and then they move on like a band of locusts. And so you had Assyria, Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire, or the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire, the Arab Empire, and on and on and on. Now that Rome is the United States. Rome isn't a time in history. It's a concept, right? It's like Caesar is a concept. It's a seizure of everything. And once they've robbed us dry of all our wealth, all of our knowledge, and all of our prosperity and our spirituality, then we go into tyranny. And only from that point can we really have the spiritual awakening that we're all trying to spark, basically.
Well,
So-
I think that's why Webster 1828 the word world is actually referred to as the Roman Empire, because in history, like it wasn't actually that long from the end of the Republic to when the Pope started to amass temporal power, where the Pope now became essentially the figurehead of this new quote unquote holy Roman Empire. And the popes the popes have been lots of these empires you mentioned have come and go for the last 1,500 years, but the popes haven't. The popes have been here for the last 1,500 years. There's no current established corporation or government or hierarchy that has a longer history and past than they do. They've been dealing with, rulers and kings of the world for, hundreds of years. And just to the point, like in the United States, like I found a really interesting, just a little speech Obama gave, and it's very revealing because Obama, like he says that this country and this world are. Let me pull up the exact quote here, just so I'm not botching it here. But Obama says that Georgetown University has been like at the center of like U.S. At the center of U.S. politics for the last 200 years. He flat out says this in this. This was a tribute to the bicentennial of Jesuit Georgetown's charter, which is like Rome's powerhouse control center in the United States. It's located only 3 or 4 miles from the White House. And then you also got the Catholic University of America close by. But Obama actually says this country and this world benefit from your commitment to Jesuit principles. Here's to the next 200 years. He said this on March 1st, 2015. So I recommend people check that out because it just shows that, and again, like I'd say the Jesuits are like the gatekeepers of this Roman control system that me and Clint had been describing. That's why like most of the top lawyers in the world, especially corporate lawyers, government lawyers, most of the top lawyers come from Jesuit institutions or Roman Catholic institutions. And just going to wrap it up here, Clint, I mentioned, it's censorship. I do have to get going here in probably 2 or 3 minutes. So I'll give you the floor after this to sum up. But I remember you mentioned that you were censored by the Anti-Defamation League. And interestingly, the Anti-Defamation League, their president, Abraham Foxman, he was the president. I believe he's the longest, one of the longest reigning president. He was the head there for over 25 years. He was actually born a Catholic in Poland, and he was given. I have the award here. Foxman was given an actual award by Pope John Paul II in 2015. He was given honored by the Archdiocese of Abraham Foxman, honored by the Archdiocese of Krakow with the Pope John Paul II Medal of Honor. I'll link that press release. That just made a lot of sense because the Catholic Church is the institution that has been censoring books for people can look up the index of the forbidden books, and I see their influence. And the ADL is one of the biggest quote unquote hate group.
Oh, they screwed me.
Here in Canada, there's actually hate laws that are in our legal code. They were put into place by Pierre Trudeau, the Jesuit-educated, devout Roman Catholic. Essentially, so the point, and people don't know, like the Vatican, they still have this today. They had a list of pretty much all of the books, the good books that were published in the Middle Ages that could enlighten the masses of Europe and the world were put on the index of forbidden books. And the Catholic Church, if they saw you like reading books that they didn't like, in the Dark Ages, they would send you to the rack.
Right.
I see that same kind of inquisitorial spirit working through the ADL, and this Abraham Foxman is a very just further proof that Zionism and Jesuitism is one and the same at this point.
Well, you have to know as well that Israel, as we call it, right, has nothing to do with Israel of the Bible, or that was again a people, and those who fell from being the Israel, those who fell from that and who became hypocrites, etc. Then they were called Yahudi or the other word, Ayudios, which I'm probably saying incorrectly. And if you go into the concordances and you actually read what a Jew is, it essentially is the fallen Israelite, who were the followers of God's word, and then those who are opposed to Christ, opposed to the New Testament, because it totally screws up their law of Moses, which allows usury and allows grocery and allows all these horrible things. It disrupts their business. It disrupts the way they harm every other nation and infiltrate. It doesn't allow that, so that of course they don't take the law of God as their savior. They keep the Babylonian law. And that's important to understand. And when you do enough research and like I said, go to these concordances and lexicons, you can read that straight out of there. It's not me saying that. It's that's the importance of understanding all these terms and everything in the Bible. Um, how they infiltrated Christianity and how there is this so-called Jewish Christian alliance, meaning Christ and Antichrist alliance, literally. I don't know. I have no idea how that could, but that's the trickery that happens. They got me fired from, or displaced, or not allowed to go back to my local AM radio station. So that ruined my any radio career I actually could have had, probably. So I'm relegated to this. I'm relegated to the alternative, to the right, because now I'm labeled as whatever. And of course that's a trick. That's trust me, the frustration, I would not be able to even possibly, you know, give you. Oh, never mind. I'm not even going to get into it.
No, well, it is. Censorship is frustrating. I'll wrap it up here, and just I think it for me it shows that like the ancient papal inquisitorial spirit of that censorship index is alive today through the ADL. Abraham Foxham, being knighted by the Pope, and like this was in the this actually in the people can read the 1993 Vatican Oslo Accord. Lots has changed since World War II when the Catholics were persecuting the Jews through the Hitler regime. But in 1993, the Vatican Oslo Accords, the Vatican says that we're signing a pact to fight against quote unquote anti-Semitism, and you can read that Israel and the Vatican joined a militant or signed a militant legal document where they said we're going to combat all hate speech. And it's right there in people type in Vatican Oslo Accord 1993. And a lot of the Jews you see today in politics, are connected to the Jesuits in Rome, like Jerry Nadler, who's currently in the news due to the theater that we're seeing with the impeachment hearing. Jerry Nadler is a Jew who is in charge of the Judiciary Committee, but he has his doctorate from the Jesuits at Fordham. We mentioned Kissinger. And recently with YouTube, Clint, I saw that the Jesuits they like to use the Dreyfus Affair tactic, where they'll, at least I've noticed this, they'll put Jews out in the front because it gives them ultimately at the end of the day plausible deniability. But there's the girl Christina Cohen drafted the FTC legal document about the YouTube censorship, and this Christina Cohen, you can probably imagine with the last name Cohen, is Jewish, but she went to Georgetown. So it's a pattern we see all over again. The head of I think we mentioned on the last stream, JINSA is another one of these militant groups. The head of JINSA, David Steinem, presumably with the last name is Jewish, but he went to Georgetown.
But it's so important and to understand what this term means and to debunk it, essentially, because we give the Jews a lot of credit that they don't deserve. They'll claim to be a race. When that doesn't work, they claim to be a religion. When that doesn't work, they claim to be this. But in truth, none of it is true. And all the talk of, oh, we suffered this, we did this, none of these people are genetically the matches of whoever that is speaking of in the Bible or anything else. What we're talking about is a group of people who've been brainwashed. And I recommend the movie Defamation, which you can find on YouTube, which covers Abe Foxman and covers the ADL and shows you what a scam it is and how they take these innocent kids and convince them that they're Jewish, right, and that they're persecuted, whereas before they were just these normal kids who had no hatred or they just absolutely clueless basically to any of this. They take them on this whirlwind tour of these fake, I won't get into that because that's what got me fired in the first place, but this movie shows you what they do and absolutely discredits the ADL in every way possible because they think he's their friend because he's a Jew from Israel. So they give him full access to the ADL, and it basically spills the beans that this is completely just a brainwashing operation. They take these kids, they completely undermine their And what they're basically doing is turning kids against the Christian nations, the model of the notion that our common law is based on Christianity or the Bible. They're destroying any notion that these kids can be part of any other. They're taught to hate everyone. And this is where the source of all this stuff is coming from. And that is also the source. The ADL is also the source of all this transgender, the drag queens reading, all this stuff that you hear about these bathrooms and the
Well, I'm saying, Clint, that makes tons of sense. Just because at this point, I think the ADL is like a Jesuitically influenced or infiltrated group, and the Jesuits are also huge into the transgender, the LGBT. Like they're literally flying a rainbow flag.
Anything to undermine the natural order of things. In other words, God and the law of God. Anything you can do to destroy that, worshiping that, the law of nature, the law of God, even down to the biological nature of the sexes, the two sexes and only two sexes, right? Anything you can do to destroy that, that is ADL is who's pushing that in schools. And you can go to their website and you can see that they're in charge of everything. They're in charge of Holocaust education. They're in charge of this. They're in charge of what they call non-binary or non-bias. So they want to. They openly ban Shakespeare, for instance, because that talks poorly about the Jew. They openly ban all these books, and yet they promote books on, extended family, meaning two men and a baby or two women and a baby. They're promoting everything that is anti New Testament, essentially anti-foundation of civilization.
This reminds me a bit of like the syllabus of errors. We'll just because like in that document, and I do have to get going here shortly, so I'll wrap up with this. Just in the syllabus of errors, it's the famous papal encyclical where the Pope basically condemns. He gives 80 points that he condemns, and he basically condemns all progress and like any resemblance of freedom, like freedom of thought, freedom of association, like your ability to, be unmolested by like law enforcement, like every single freedom you can imagine is condemned. Like the idea that the priest shouldn't be involved in politics, that's condemned in there. But one of the errors is that there's it's stated, and it's an error to say that there's salvation outside of the church, which is kind of similar though to this new militant Zionist wing. It's all about that only in my little militant group can you be saved, and everyone outside of it is a heretic. That's kind of, I see that as the foundational similarity between the two groups.
Exactly.
And I would say, and this is a quote from the Bilderberg group. The founder of the Bilderberg Society, which is one of these elite aristocratic groups, they meet in secret every year. People can look up the list of the Bilderberg group, all sorts of New World Order types in there. But the founder of the Bilderberg group was actually a Jesuit named Joseph Rettinger. And I have his memoirs that I've put onto my archive.org page. And Joseph, and just right from the Bilderberg website here, it just says here that the definition, this is coming from bilderbergmeetings.co.uk/Joseph Rettinger. I think you'll find this quote interesting here, Clint, if you haven't heard it. It says the definition of so the Rettinger wanted, so between 1906 and 1920, Joseph Rettinger, worked on projects as diverse as, the definition of a reorganization plan for Central and Eastern Europe wanted by the general of the Jesuits, the Polish Count Lidichowski Waldemir, the creation of a world government with the British Federalist Arthur Capel, the creation of the State of Israel, in collaboration with some of the leaders of the Zionist movement, such as Chaim Weizmann, who became the first prime minister, and Nahum Sokolov. And then the Bilderberg website continues, Rettinger was one of those who best understood the contribution of the United States in the post-war world, contributing more than any other to establish the transatlantic Bilderberg group. But that's just a really interesting quote. I think that shows that, right from their own website that, like they were involved, or the Jesuit, the highest authority within the Jesuit order, the Black Pope, who's referred to, his title is a general. And this goes into, like we're saying, like the whole militaristic nature of our legal system. Like the Jesuits are a military order. They're not just a group of priests. And Napoleon Bonaparte actually has a quote where he says that the Jesuit order seeks power. in its most raw form. He says that Napoleon said the Jesuits are not merely priests, but and their leaders a general. But just and I have this up here on my screen. Just you on the last show we did, Clint. You were reading through the Senate Report 93-549, which I recommend everyone go through. After you mentioned that, I've downloaded the report to my reader here. But it's admitted in this report, on the first page that the powers of the power to grant emergency status dates back to the Roman Republic. That's right on the first page of the report, and it says this right after the majority of the people of the United States have been living their entire lives under emergency rule.
Right. Well, let me
covertly admit it. Yeah, I'll wrap it up there if you have anything else.
Just so people, when they do read this, so they have a little background, little understanding of why are they saying emergency instead of war, right? Why emergency? Well, national emergency, defined in Black's Law Dictionary, a state of national crisis, a situation demanding immediate and extraordinary national or federal action. Now, in Brown versus Bernstein, a case, DC PA 49F, so that Congress, this is quote, Congress has made little or no distinction between a state of national emergency and a state of war. Okay, why is that important? Because war is under what's called the law of necessity, right? And if you understand what that means, it's pretty frightening, because guess what? Necessity means there is no law. That's why it's so important to understand that Congress knows this, by the way. They can take this power away at any time. I also wanted to make sure that was clear. Congress absolutely understands that this power exists and that the president can use it, and they will actually use it as an excuse to say, well, our hands are tied. President did an executive order that we can't go against that. Now, can we?
Well, was it in Clinton? Right? It was the Congress that actually created like the word FEMA. This is all titled into the title of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. That goes right into the title.
There you go. Right, and see, this is the thing. Like I said, a necessity knows no law. That's a maxim. So, in other words, when they declare a state of war or emergency, they are equal. What we have then is a war against an emergency, right? So, what's the emergency? Well, we had the bird flu scare, and they created one for that, which said basically they could force inoculate you, right? So all they have to do is declare a national emergency, and it can be anything. It could be the most ridiculous thing, something stupid, and they could then invoke a bunch of powers that already exist. And that's the problem, is over the years, without your knowledge, without your understanding, in what are called omnibus bills, which are a bunch of different bills and that have a bunch of different things in them, even in just everyday bills, they'll just add something in there, and it will contribute to the national emergency statutes, which are...
Recently, Obama actually put the words in peacetime. His executive order 13603, I think it was National Defense and Resource Preparedness. He said that the president has these extraordinary powers in emergency and peacetime. He actually added the word peacetime, and Obama actually covertly legalized slave labor in the same executive order.
Sure, I mean, like I said, all of this is there. Everything that you could want, and by the way, something we didn't cover is that the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are now either law or executive order in the United States. All of them, the central bank being a huge one, right? The Federal Reserve. So all of the 10 planks of communism are now law or executive order or presidential directive in the United States. I want you to think about that for a moment. And that's been that way for a long time. So all the time they're just putting these things on there that can be invoked. Right now they sit there. They just sit there until it's time to, until the national emergency is declared. Then they already have all this structure of law that says, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, but only in an emergency or war, right? So the system is set up, like you said before, or I said, that there is no constitution. If it's suspendable at any time due to an emergency or war, then there really is no constitution. It's a joke. It's not real. There's no marriage if it can be annulled. There's no contract if it can be annulled at any time without any, just by saying, "Oh, sorry, we're done. Emergency." Right? So you got to understand that there's this whole infrastructure, this whole other government in place, and what and that goes back to the Libra Code and the Civil War and all that, which is a whole other can of worms that I covered on my previous Red Pill Sunday School shows. But I mean, you're talking about right at any time. Not that you're under it, but the government is bound by the Constitution. Once you suspend the Constitution, law and necessity takes over. They can do whatever the hell they want. And because they've already put laws in place and you haven't fought it, you haven't done anything about it, you don't even know they exist, mostly, because you don't read those bills. I don't read the bills. I used to. I already know what's in them. They've already set up the infrastructure. They've already set up everything to do exactly what this says. And what does it say? It says this is that report you were talking about. Since March the 9th, 1933, I said that was an important year. That's when the United States was in this put into state of declared national emergency, and we've been in it ever since. This vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. This is Congress talking. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the president may seize power, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate all operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens. Congressman James Beck speaking in 1933. That's right on the congressional record. Okay, that means that, in other words, all of those things that are listed, they already have the laws or the executive orders or whatever on the books to allow them to do that. All they have to do is declare a national emergency.
Well, absolutely. And Clint, another big document that I found out after our first stream was the Defense Production Act of 1950. That basically gave the president all of the same powers that you just read. And that Obama executive order I cited earlier, 13603, was basically Obama beefing up the Defense Production Act of 1950, which was further based off of Roosevelt's declaration of a national emergency with the Emergency Banking Act. And it's just an incredible gray area, because there's 31 active national emergencies outstanding declared by the U.S. government. There's 31 emergencies with that. So it just shows essentially we're at the complete mercy of the state.
But see, this is the thing, and this is what I want people to understand. Congress can stop this anytime they want to. They can change that. They can prevent it. They can do anything they want, but they don't. And the reason they can do that is because they've set specific boundaries. They said, well, okay, you can keep doing it, but you have to redeclare it every year. So Bush's declaration after 9/11 that you were talking about has been redeclared by every president, right? All the things that what was it called? The act, the Patriot Act and all that stuff. All of that every year is redeclared by every president.
I mean, there's people that act is this is further proof that shows the Jesuit puppet masters that the Patriot Act was drafted by a Georgetown professor, Veet Din, who's now the top lawyer at Disney after the massive mega Disney Fox merger. And this Veet Din was the attorney, or he was a lawyer at News Corp, and so he worked for News Corp and then became an attorney general and then investigated News Corp afterwards.
Nice.
He found nothing going on there. And actually, this is the perfect way, I think, for me to sign off here, Clint. Just another puppet master of the Bush War on Terror era was a guy named David Addington. There's a great article that the New Yorker wrote called The Hidden Power of the Legal Mind Behind the White House's War on Terror, written by Jane Meyer. But this David Addington was known as a Cheney's Cheney or Cheney's hitman. And he was Addington is credited to actually being the legal mind behind the military commission bills that was passed, all the new martial law parameters that was signed by Bush. People just got to read. The New York Times even did an editorial called "Making Martial Law Easier" during this during the middle of this hysteria with the post 9/11 putting the military government in place. But just the New Yorker quotes David Addington, and David Addington went to Georgetown. The New Yorker says, for years, Addington had a copy of the U.S. Constitution in his pocket. Taped onto the back are photocopies of extra statutes that detail the legal procedures for presidential succession in times of national emergency. So, and guys like this, like these Jesuit trained lawyers, like these guys, just like they're the true gatekeepers of this legal innuendos. They're the
Sure.
have a full grasp of the Latin, like the meanings of English words tied to Latin, and this Addington guy, like he's this New Yorker article shows that he has this like collection after collection after collection of national security law, collection after collection of executive orders, emergency declarations. But these guys seem to be, and I think it just makes perfect sense considering that the national emergency, dates back to the Roman and Greek.
Well, here's the note that I have on that, by the way. It says the concept of constitutional dictatorship, which is basically what this is, goes clear back. So you get people to accept the Constitution, then you suspend it and become a dictator, right? It goes back to circa Roman Republic, circa 508 BC. And there it was determined that in times of dire emergencies, the Constitution and the rights of the people could be suspended temporarily until the crisis could be resolved, whatever its nature. But once the crisis was resolved, the Constitution was to be returned to its peacetime position of authority over the temporary authority and emergency powers of the aristocracy. Checks and balances would be restored, in others. Now, in France, this is the situation in which the Constitution could be suspended. It's called the state of siege. In Great Britain, it's called the Defense of the Realms Act, and in Germany, it was Article 48 of their Constitution. So, in the United States, we just simply call it the war powers, and it's it goes back to this. This is Section 95, 12 U.S. Code, Section 95B. The actions, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, as in executive orders, and proclamations, heretofore and hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of Treasury. That's why it seems the Federal Reserve is so rogue. Since March the 4th, 1933, there's that year again, pursuant to the amended U.S. Code, are hereby approved and confirmed. This means that Congress approved and confirmed the actions, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, and proclamations taken after 1933 of the president. The president doesn't need to confer with Congress to do anything. That's why you have the president going in and into Vietnam, into Korea, into 50 different countries, bombing the shit out of them without any declaration of war or approval of Congress. You see, this is a big thing that nobody talks about. This should be the only thing we talk about. If you were to run for president, we should require that the new president will do away with it, or a congressman will do away with this ability, this especially this particular title, that allows the president to do anything he wants. They know it. It's not like it's a secret. It's not like their hands are actually tied. It's how they operate a criminal organization. It's organized crime, and this is how they do it. They create a tyrant, but they hide it behind executive orders and the law of necessity and emergency. It's the same as war, and it is a war. It's a war on us. It's a war on the world. So, yeah, unless this goes away, then there is no real constitutional government. It's all a scam. It's a trick.
Oh, well said, Clint. And I'll just before we sign up, I think it's a researcher, Eric John Phelps, I think I accurately termed this like the Jesuits' 14th Amendment American Empire. The corporation citizenship. That's kind of what's taking place. And just an interesting side fact before we go, just ties into these guys are the men in black. But I'll send you this guy's book. If you're not aware, the official Hollywood motion picture code was actually drafted by a fourth vow Jesuit priest. His name was Daniel Aloysius Lord, S.J. And he and immediately after he drafted this code, you had the Legion of Decency created in Hollywood, which is this, and basically all of like the it's interesting because it shows the alliance also between Zionism and the Catholic Church. Because if you start reading into the history, Jewish directors like Jack Warner would have Catholic priests come onto the set to review the films, and the production code administration that was set up afterwards was headed by Joseph Ignatius Breen, educated by Jesuits. And his job was to enforce the code that was drafted by the Jesuit Lord. And it's really interesting history because it ties in to just the Jesuit Manuel Lacunza, who wrote The Rapture, actually disguised himself as a Jew. What was his name? He disguised himself as a Jew named Ben Ezra. So it says the Jesuits actually have it's a long history that especially with Hollywood kind of like a merging of
what's their motto?
Zionist and Jesuit interests.
What's their motto? I know it's something about deceit.
Oh, wait, tell me the ends justify the means? Or?
No, it's like rule by deceit or something like that. I can't remember, but I commend you for all this research that you've done into this. I got to direct more people to you I mean, it's just incredible that you have all these quotes at your fingertips and everything. So congratulations. I mean, you've sort of converted me into remembering that there's this upper sort of order, that's behind all these different fingerlings.
Thanks. Well, your research is really like the foundation of what everything. You showed me that I guess the Roman Catholic Church controlling the legal system. Like all the maxims are Latin, and like the fiction, like we mentioned, like the dog Latin, English being dog Latin, and once I had that understanding, the Jesuit side of the puzzle kind of, I view them as like the managers of this massive trust system that you described so well through your work. And I recommend your work to people too, that check out Reality Blogger, WordPress, and some of your documentaries. Many of them are still available on YouTube too. I think the Corporation Nation's still up there.
Yeah, they're still up there. But I mean, I gotta say, like I said, after all this research, and I lost a lot of listeners by coming out and saying the truth, which is the only thing that actually allows you to free yourself from all of this stuff is the Bible. And it's not just saying that, it's the reason they put it as the foundation of the common law, so that again they could create their own stuff against it, because you had to have that good in order to create the bad that goes against. You have to have what's opposite, or what's antagonistic to it. You can't put a bad thing in as law unless you have something good, and then give people the opportunity to follow the good. And like I said, it warns you against all their tricks. That's the amazing thing about it. So I'm not telling people to become a Christian, because that's part of their paradigm. It's not a real thing. It's a corporation. What I am telling you, though, is that in this book, there's this example to follow. And the reason that he goes through all those turmoils and all those things is to show you that you can do the same. You can be Christ-like. You can follow the law of nature, the law of God, the law of reality, and not fall into the traps that this order, right, this new world order thing has put for you. And again, take away the religiosity and realize that there's a mystery here, and certainly a learning curve to learn what these words mean. But there's only one thing that they recognize, and trust me, they recognize. Just look up act of God and you'll understand what they recognize as God, which is nature. An act of nature is an act of God, right? They understand. And until we have this spiritual awakening that only the Bible can do, because it is the truth. I mean, like I said, if I could say that without sounding religious, I would. But they've indoctrinated and just ruined it for us. But man, if I could just put into words this stuff that I've found, and like I said, it's all against everything they throw at us. There's a cure for it right there. Either don't accept it, don't act in person, don't take their title, don't use their money, don't no usury, no grocery, no. It's all in there. and it's absolutely 100% there to oppose their system, and their system is 100% there to oppose the Bible. And I don't know how else to say it, but it's the key to everything. And I wish, beyond anything I could muster right now, and I'm talking that when you have the ADL against you and you have all these organizations against you when you're trying to promote the Bible, right? The Jews are against you, trying to promote the New Testament when they don't accept it and they don't want it out there because former slaves have said that a Bible reading people cannot be enslaved either physically or mentally.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring up that point, and the point. Yeah, that's a great quote. A Bible reading people can't be enslaved. Many men have stated that, and there's a reason. Going back to the Inquisition, there's a reason why so many Christians were brutalized on the rack and tortured in the most barbarous, vicious ways. And you can see the photos. That's where the waterboarding comes from. It comes from the Roman Inquisition, for instance. So the amount of people that have died for wanting to know what's in the Bible. Even if you're like not a Christian, you should realize that like the fact that the papacy and the powers that be have viewed it as an imperative to stamp out people reading the Bible for themselves.
Well, yeah, and it's a perfect example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? You throw the Bible out with the religion, but the Bible is before the religion. The religion is something that uses the Bible as a tool or furniture, but it's a standalone thing. And I think that's probably the scariest thing to them is that they know this thing is standalone. It's not a religion, it's a book of law. And if you follow that law, there's just nothing they can do. It's just so freaking amazing. Well, now, that doesn't mean they can't use force and kill you, but I'd rather die a free man than a slave any day.
Oh, me too. And worst comes, I'd rather go out like Jan Hus did, great Czechoslovakian Protestant. He precedes Luther like 300 years. The papacy burned him alive because he was trying to enlighten his fellow Czechs with the word of the Bible. I'd rather go out like that than just go along with the.
Today it's more of a virtual burning, right? We're in virtual reality, so we're virtually being burned.
Well, what's powerful? Like all it takes is to smear someone, to make up a couple lies about someone, to say, "Oh, look at this!" Like misquote someone in a certain way, and you can totally like defame and like ruin someone's lifestyle. And, like,
that's the whole anti-Semitism, and yet any Jewish encyclopedia or dictionary will say that Jews are not Semite. Semites are Arabs, actually. So it's just so funny when you actually count. You do any little bit of research into some of the things they say. Anti-Semite, or you're a Holocaust denier. They use that more in England. Or excuse me, in Europe, but they'll also say it's a trick. It's how you shut down conversation. It's not real. It doesn't mean anything. And there's plenty of other things you can say that have nothing to do with that. That you can shut down a conversation without attack the messenger essentially, and so therefore the message gets ignored. You don't fight the message, you fight the messenger. Perfect attack for a people that have nothing backing up what they claim to be. So, that's how it works.
Yeah, it's the same tactic. The papacy uses also the same.
Yeah.
And that's not the same blueprint that the Zionist and
excommunication too, right?
Excommunication, absolutely, yes. And actually, that was shown in the John Wick movie recently. John Wick was excommunicated and deconsecrated from his group of assassins. They put all this Roman mystical I guess more legal terminology into the movie. But
yeah.
I do have to get going here. My girlfriend just arrived here at the apartment. She's wanting me to finish up. Fantastic chat as always.
Your girlfriend wants you to finish up? That's rare.
Well, she finish up the conversation. Maybe I said that.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah,
all right, you can cut that out.
You just got us here a minute too. I mean, I worded that. Yeah, I worded that very poorly.
You must be doing something wrong. All right, man. Thanks so much again. It's funny we did all that and we didn't really get into the emergency thing, but yeah, I think we
Well,
said it enough.
yeah, we can do that more in the next video. But I think we gave a general overview of how the
Yeah,
ancient world history dates back to the Roman Republic, and like you said, every
unbelievable.
single country today has the power to suspend their constitution. I know India has done it like 6 times since they became a nation state in 1947. Every country does it. So, but yeah, I do have to get going here,
All
Clint.
right, man.
I'll keep in touch. I'll send you some of the source material I mentioned on the stream today, and I'm looking forward to your new Red Pill Sunday show, season 2.
Oh yeah, I suppose I should mention that, huh? You can put a link down there. Maybe it's just if you go to YouTube, it's Red Pill Sunday School. Should be able to find it. That's the name of the channel.
Yeah, I'll put links to your website and your YouTube in the description of the
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thanks everyone for
Alrighty.
thanks everyone for tuning in. And as I say, all roads lead to Rome, and self awareness though is the answer at the end of the day. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one.
Take it easy.